My name is Dr. Julia Budnik, and I work for SDS Seminars. And my co-director, Paul Grantham, Professor Paul Grantham, is always and also here. And he will introduce our speaker. But while we are all gathering, if you don't mind just to write in the chat box a little bit about yourself. What's your name? Where are you joining us from? Have you been to any of these Thursdays before? Actually, I have a poll with that question. Let me try to launch it. Poll number 1. Have you attended any of SDS Thursdays before? Yes or no? And it's amazing to see so many new people. Welcome. Welcome. What, approximately 50-50. 50% of people were here before with us, and about 45-46% is here for the first time. Very nice to see you all, because I do see lots of familiar faces and lots of new faces as well. Okay, share results so you can see what kind of audience we've got tonight. And I'll launch another poll if I can. And poll number 2. Have you attended any other SDS events, not Free Thursdays, any other courses which we run? Because we'll be talking today about one of the forthcoming courses which Professor Andrew Reeves will be doing for us. That's really nice. And I hope you will meet our tutors and presenters and come to one of the courses. I'll end polling now and share the results. Okay. Okay, it's 7 o'clock. Welcome to SDS Thursday. And today we are very, very lucky to have with us Professor Andrew Reeves, who will be talking on the topic which unfortunately has become even more topical since we've entered 2020 and the lockdown. So I'm very glad to see you all here. And please let me introduce my co-director, Professor Paul Grantham, who will tell you a little bit more about our presenter and about the topic we're going to cover. Paul, please.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Julia. As Julia said, we're really lucky this evening to have Andrew with us, both for this particular Free Thursday event and also to be leading a Zoom event early on in the new year, starting in the 12th of January. It's a 3-session event spread over 3 weeks, really primarily to prevent or militate against Zoom fatigue. We're doing it in 3 2-hour sessions. I'm sure Julie will pop up in a minute a link for how you can join us on that particular event. Andrew basically has researched in the area of therapy with suicidal patients and clients and those who self-injure over a 25-year period. He's an associate professor in the counselling professions and mental health at the University of Chester, and he's also director of, he's also a director at the Charlie Waller Trust, if I understand that correctly. What I just wanted to say was this is always quite clearly a particularly important issue to actually be a part of. But I think that particularly at the moment, we have some fairly clear evidence that's coming forward, really, that the whole issue of suicide is becoming a much more concerning and prominent issue, really, for us. And that in actual fact, we know that since lockdown began, we now have a situation where people seeking help for suicide has substantially increased. In fact, I just wanted to very briefly share with you, I hope you can see that on your screen, coming up now, which is, is it that one? There we go. An article, this is actually only from the 8th of November, very recent indeed, indicating that this is specifically about the relationship between suicidal intent and lockdown, and that the number of people who are seeking help for suicidal thoughts has tripled since lockdown began. So on the one hand, rather sadly, but also arguably quite fortunately, we have Andrew with us here this evening, who's going to be providing us with some initial clues and indications about this particular field. And also, in addition to that, folks, just again to remind you, he'll be leading a longer event spread over 3 particular days, 2-hour slots in each one, early on next year. And as I said, Julia will be putting up some details of that, so you can join in on that as well. And that's really all I'll say now. I'll pass you over to Andrew, and we're really looking forward to your thoughts on this evening, Andrew. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you so much everyone for joining. As I see the numbers in the participants list growing higher and higher, my anxiety seems to follow it. So with all you staring back at me, I'm now in a position of absolute complete terror. So let's hope it all calms down and that this session is useful to you. I mean, Paul and Julia make a really important point that you know, this is a really pressing issue, but you know, I would argue that perhaps this is an issue that's becoming more visible and maybe more talked about in some ways over the recent months. But actually, I've been a practitioner for nearly 30 years, and you know, this has been an ever-present part of my work all that time. I never imagined myself kind of all these years on into my career talking about suicide. And I talk about suicide because I go back to when I was a trainee therapist back in the late 80s, which is why, of course, I sit in a really dark room, so you can't see that I'm actually 140 years old now. Back in the late 80s when I was training, I remember working with a woman who I called Isabel. And we were doing some fabulous work together. She had been involved in mental health services for many, many years, in fact, 30 odd years, and had never been offered any form of kind of talking therapy. And I won't go into all the backgrounds and all the details now, but I remember the session vividly where she had booked for herself some appointments the following week to get back into voluntary work. She'd got out of a very abusive relationship. She was building her self-esteem, feeling really confident. Lots of things were changing. And she was very excited about what she had got planned. And we ended the session and she shook my hand and she says, "Oh, Andrew, I'm feeling very good. I'm feeling really, really good." And she, we confirmed next week, and she left the building and she got on the bus and she went home and she killed herself. She took a large overdose, which she had clearly been planning to take. And I found out the following morning, and as a trainee therapist, I was propelled into a really very, very difficult place. What I didn't call it then, but I have since called it, was trauma. And I mean capital T trauma, flashbacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, unable to work. As well as a profound sense of grief and loss, professionally, of course, in kind of the work we had been doing, and Isabel as somebody that I've been working with, but also personally as well, that as in our work in the helping professions, whatever role that you have, we get to know people very intimately, albeit held within a professional frame. And so I knew Isabel professionally, and I knew so much about Isabel's life that the loss was felt really at 2 profound levels. And it's really because of what happened with me and Isabel all that time ago that all these years on I still talk about this. And I talk about it because it's really, really important. It's really important because it's profoundly important for our clients or our patients, however we call them. I use the word clients, so that's what I use. It's important for us and our self-care. It's important for the practice that we do. It's important for people's confidence in what we do. I could go on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for about 35 minutes, and I'm going to cover some key ground. Inevitably, because it's a short period of time, I mean, even if I do this session when I was training face to face, I do this in a 6-7 hour day, there is still a tendency of jumping along the surface of some things. So some of the detail will miss out today, but I hope that you will get something that's really important to you. I want to start by setting the scene. So I want to introduce you to Anne. So Anne is a 56-year-old teacher. She's been attending counselling for a short while. She suffers with chronic pain, and she's less able to do the things that she was able to do, but she has been feeling increasingly hopeless about her future. And I want to just take a few minutes with Anne and then kind of reflect on some of the professional and personal challenges that we face in our work in the context of Anne's experience.
Hello, Anne. It's nice to see you again. Do you want to start by telling me a little bit more about this week, how this week's been for you?
In a way, I've been really glad to get here to tell you that to tell someone that I've had a really crappy week. I've never known a week like it.
Right.
Terrible. Really terrible.
You look really distressed when you're telling me that.
It's just been like no other week. I've had so many thoughts about myself and about what future is ahead, and I don't know, incidents at work have, I guess, sparked things off, and I suppose it sort of centres on the fact that I guess my back pain is getting worse, and I don't seem to be able to do what I used to do, and that's not like me. And so I feel what's happening to me is not really me. It's not me.
There's also things happening around you and to you that are making you think about you and your future.
What future? That's exactly it.
Right. You can't see a future for yourself.
No, I can't. I always look forward to retirement, and I never thought I would have to think about maybe taking early retirement, which, I don't know, I'm someone who really enjoys the job, but just in this last year, I just feel so threatened by, I feel quite paranoid sometimes, people saying that they can maybe take things over for me because they know I have a problem. And so in a way, not addressing how I might be feeling, but making a point of saying I have a problem. And therefore, bits of my job are going. And I think, well, what's the point really? If I can't do what I used to do. I tried talking to my husband about it. And, well, it's a non-starter really.
So you're quite alone in this. There's nobody that you feel is really getting what you're feeling or what's happening to you. You said before, Anne, that you thought about your future and you couldn't see any. I wonder what that meant.
Well, with back pain that doesn't get better, I look at myself now and they talk about the aging process, and that's all sort of stuff with the menopause and things, and losing one's role and as the children leave home. Well, it's true. It's true. And I know I'm not going to get better, and I think I'm not going to get better and I'm this bad now, then, well, I'll be in a wheelchair. And I don't really see people in wheelchairs at the moment, but I'm beginning to. But before people, I would say that I was never conscious of people in wheelchairs.
That's not a future you want for yourself.
I'd hate it.
Yeah. I have this feeling as you're talking, and I wonder if what you're feeling is about wanting to end your life. I wonder if that's what you're telling me.
I have to be truthful, and in fact, it's a relief to be able to tell you that during this week I've thought of that very much.
It's been quite a strong thought for you this week.
It's very frightening as well.
Yes. What thoughts have you had? I mean, how specific have your thoughts been?
It's somehow like, because people don't notice me, or, I feel so incidental at the moment, I just want to slip away. I want to go quietly.
What would that be?
Without hurt. Maybe I'm not very brave, but I just want to slip away, and then people won't necessarily need to talk about me because they won't really have missed me.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what you would do? You thought what you would do?
Yeah. I want to go back to the sea near where I was born, where I used to get a lot of pleasure of walking along cliffs. And then I just want to slip away. And somehow I don't feel. None.
So the situation with Anne there is probably something that we've experienced in our rooms. Sometimes there's this idea that people will walk in the room and be very clear and say that they intend to end their life, and for sure some people do that. But the research that I've been involved in kind of suggests that people are much more likely to, at the first instance of talking of suicide, refer to suicide in metaphor or allude to it, which presents real challenges for us as practitioners in being able to ask the question like I did of Anne then. And at another time I can go into more detail as to some of the challenges in that. But we have a challenge here as a practitioner in that we have somebody who in many ways has capacity, is engaged, is there's evidence of a really good therapeutic process. She's emotionally articulate. She's thought things through. There is a move towards intent. There's no suggestion that her plan is an immediate action. And so we're in the realms that we usually find ourselves in, which is around positive risk taking. Do we seek Anne's permission to speak to her GP, or maybe a mental health team? If she says yes, we can do that. If she says no, what do we do? Do we break her confidentiality? Do we hold her confidentiality? How do we make these decisions? And the reason why this is so difficult is because not only because we don't have the ability to predict the future accurately, but because there's a whole load of things going on. So, as is always the case in therapy, of course, there's in this instance me and Anne, but beyond this there's a whole network of systems that I need to be aware of. There's the working context, the setting in which Anne and I are working. Am I an independent practitioner? Am I working in an IAP service, or in primary care, or in for an EAP, or what have you? There's my perspectives, about how do I feel about Anne? What happens in that relationship? What's my views on suicide? What do I bring to this? What do I bring as a human being? That notion that we're told in training that, of course, that when we go into therapy, to deliver therapy, to engage in therapy, that we leave everything at the door, of course, in my personal view, is a load of nonsense, that we take everything in the room with us. The challenge, of course, is that we don't act that out with our clients. A whole range of other services. Anne was referred by her GP. What's my relationship to the GP? Mental health services, her employer, her family, her friends. You know, Anne sits in a context. You know, she doesn't sit in isolation. I'm likely, possibly, to be a member of a professional body. I think most of the professional bodies who certainly hold PSA registered, Professional Standards Authority registers, or people who work in the psychology frame, work to an ethical framework. You know, what's the ethical position that I should take here? My anxieties: what if I get this wrong? What if I make the wrong call? What if I force the issue and speak to Anne's GP against her will and fracture this relationship and remove the last vestiges of support that she has? Or what if I hold the confidentiality? That will kind of pay off if Anne turns up to her session next week. But should Anne die between this session and the next session, how do I articulate the decisions that I've made in practice? Well, in part, that's rooted by policy and procedure. What does my contract say? What does the policy of the organisation say? If I'm working independently, what kind of policies have I put in place for myself? Have I done a risk assessment? You know, have I ticked all the boxes, literally and metaphorically, the therapeutic contract, which I've referred to? And what's the evidence base? You know, what is the research telling us? And so on and so on. And I touch on just a few things here. And if you imagine that all of these are spinning plates, and we're sat in the room with Anne, and Anne is there, and I am here, and I have to process all of this. I have to do the best I can for Anne, for me, for the therapeutic relationship, for the things I stand for in therapy. And this is why this can be a profoundly onerous process for people. So what I intend to do very quickly, so you'll forgive me, I'm going to bounce over these, if you don't mind, which is a bit of a stupid question, because if you do, you can't do much about it. So I'm going to bounce across these fairly quickly. I'm going to start with the whole notion of risk assessment. You know, it's a term that's used extensively about the systematic gathering of key information, you know, generally determining the likelihood of an undesired event happening, in this instance, whether Anne will harm herself or will end her life. You know, am I meeting my contractual, ethical, human obligations to Anne? That I make use of accepted knowledge. You type into Google Scholar or an academic search engine suicide risk factors, you will be overwhelmed with the abundance of research that tells you who is more likely to end their life than somebody else, and what are the protective factors. The problem is, and this is a personal point of view, and I'm going to offer some personal points of view based on my research and based on my practice, and I imagine there'll be some of you agreeing and some of you disagreeing, and hopefully we can kind of bring that out a little bit. But in my view, risk assessment in that form is a bit of a fool's errand. It's a bit of a cul-de-sac. It doesn't actually tell us what we think we're going to know. We tick the boxes because they make us feel better, not because they're going to give us any real meaningful information. It means that at the end of the day, we can go home and we think, phew, I did that box, it's in the file, it's on the records, and I've done the right thing. And I'm not criticizing that. I've experienced the suicide of 4 clients in my practice over the years. I've been there, and I know what it's like to have that experience. But we get drawn by risk assessment, and the thing that concerns me mostly about it is my last point, is that increasingly helping agencies, therapy agencies in whatever form, are seeing risk assessment as a start and stop of a process. We get the clients to fill in a form at the beginning, or we fill in a form in early sessions, or we ask a question at the beginning, and then it's a job done, it's a tick box. And it ceases to be, much more importantly, a therapeutic process. And I would argue it doesn't actually help us very much at all. So if we apply some of the principles of the evidence, a risk assessment might tell us and it's a female, that she has chronic pain, tick. She's experiencing different aspects of loss, tick. She feels emotionally isolated, tick. She appears to have capacity, tick. She has suicide ideation with some generalized plans, tick. She did think it would be a relief to be able to talk, protective factor, but she is fearful about her future and is feeling hopeless. So I think what we illustrate very quickly is that the risk assessment tools enable us to identify key factors, but what they don't do is, of course, the key thing that we want them to do, which is to tell us what to do. So risk factors, what do I do with Anne? And this session is coming to a close, and how do I respond? What can I offer Anne that's meaningful? So we have the context, so what's the context saying? How helpful is information about the context? That will profoundly influence what we do. It shapes the decisions that we make. We might not like the things that we have to do in the working context. We might disagree with it, but if we're signed up to work there, either voluntary or paid, we're signed up to the policies and procedures of the organisation. We can challenge them, but what we can't do is disregard them. Some research that I did found that when counsellors didn't like the risk assessment policy of the organisation, their general way of coping with it was by completely disregarding the policy and doing their own thing anyway, which kind of confirms my own experience that counsellors sometimes can be a bit like herding cats. That counsellors will do their own thing, often with very, very good intention. I talk about the individual anxiety, of course. Well, that sits institutionally. Institutions are also terrified of things going wrong. For the individual, they're not lacking humanity, but also reputational damage, the impact on staff of inquests, of coroner's hearings, of publicity. Having just supported somebody through a public coroner's hearing, it can be a brutal process, and working independently doesn't get us off the hook. We still have to think about, what are we going to do if I'm working online, or if back in the day when we could work face to face, what am I communicating to my clients? How am I ensuring that the service I deliver is equitable and fair? How do I know my clients are making informed choices about what I say about risk? I can trot out the contract, anything you say is confidential unless I believe you're at risk of somebody else or other people. But actually, do people really take that on? Do they really understand what that means in practice? My experience is often not. And then I talked about personal perspectives, so what do I mean by the personal perspectives? Why is that relevant? Well, it's relevant because we're human beings, and we're not robots, we're not autonomous, we're not bots that sit on some programs, we're not Alexa. Alexa, tell me what to do in response to Anne. We're not that. We're human beings, we feel things, we experience things, and we have to process things. So I would argue, actually, regardless of sorry, that went back too quickly. I would argue, regardless of theoretical orientation, actually, that we still take ourselves in the door, even if we don't actively use ourselves in the session. The fact that we take ourselves into the room doesn't, of course, mean that we get into widespread self-disclosure, that we tell our clients all about ourselves. These things often sit very personally for us. And our views on suicide will be shaped by a whole stack of things. Maybe this workshop will shape your view. You'll go away thinking differently. Faith, spirituality can be hugely important. Our own experiences of having been suicidal, I can think of crisis points in my life when thoughts of suicide have come to me, or in our family, being bereaved through suicide. Music we listen to, films we watch, books we read, our cultural context, and I mean cultural context with a small c and a capital C, the history, the communities in which we live and how that shapes how we feel. All of that is going to be very, very present with Anne. And if we tell ourselves that it's not, then it will be even more present, because what we're doing is stepping back from that level of reflexivity, and we run the risk of acting out our views if we're not careful. And I have lots of examples from the research that can illustrate how easy that can happen. The therapeutic contract, we trot these contracts out. We're taught to do it in training, and we trot these contracts out. Everything that we talk about is confidential between us, unless I believe you concerns about your immediate safety, and that I need to discuss with somebody else. Do we ever really, truly deconstruct that with clients? Do we ever really truly deconstruct that for ourselves? Who is this magical somebody else that we're going to speak to? Presumably the mental health services who were sitting quietly with nothing else to do, just waiting for your phone call. Well, I worked in a mental health crisis team for many years, and I wasn't sitting waiting for your phone call. What I would do probably was deflect your phone call as much as possible, because we were so stretched, we were so pushed, and we were so busy that I could only respond to people whose risk was immediate and in the moment. I wouldn't be in a position to respond to Anne's risk, not because I don't care. I would care profoundly about it, but simply because I couldn't be in two places at one time. That's not a criticism of mental health services, because they're full of very caring people, but it is a statement of where a lot of mental health services are at. Are we competent to do what we say we're going to do? You know, if we believe that you're at risk, we will act on that. Well, what are we basing that on? How are we making those judgments? If I had £1 for every time I've asked somebody, you know, what did you base that decision on to act in that certain way? And very experienced practitioners turn around and say, no, well, it was just kind of instinct. It was just a gut feeling. Now, we haven't got time today to get into whether there's a place for instinct and gut feeling in the therapeutic process. Let's just say, for the sake of calm, there is, but not in the face of exploring suicide. Because if I needed ultimately to articulate my practice to my supervisor or to my manager or to a coroner and said, well, I did this because of gut feeling, then I'm not going to go very far with that argument. And it somewhat belies the extent of training that I've done. You know, we put a lot of energy into our training, a lot of money, a lot of time. We at least need to do service to it by being able to say, well, I did this because of this, and this. It might ultimately have not been a decision, an outcome that I had anticipated, but I did my best, because we can't predict the future. The evidence base, well, that will save us, won't it? Because we all know that the evidence base is the knight in shining armor that comes rattling in, and that we can all rely on it. I mean, that's all we ever talk about these days, isn't it? You know, the evidence base, the evidence base, the evidence base. And there's a lot of evidence around suicide risk, for sure. There's this huge risk assessment industry of people churning out risk assessment forms that we'll all dutifully sometimes buy, sometimes download, sometimes pay for, sometimes use without paying for. Of course, I'm not confessing that I've ever done that. And we'll tick the forms and we'll go through the process. And this must be right, because this is science, isn't it? And we all know, if nothing else, in the last few months, if you follow the science, it's all going to be grand. So we follow the science, and we follow the science because we're anxious. Yeah, it's really hard to make a decision in relation to what do we do in response to Anne's risk? Well, we need science to help us with that. And we turn to science because it's objective and it's true and it's always, always right. Well, maybe not. Maybe that's not always the case. Now, I'm not saying that there is nothing of value in the risk assessment tools, nothing of value in the research. There's a whole ton of stuff that's of value for sure, and it's expanded our understanding considerably. There are, in fact, a plethora of research articles into suicide risk factors. You would probably only need to read about 20 of them, because the other 350,000 of them say pretty much the same thing. We generally know. We generally know what the risk factors are. And all of these are distilled. So all the different types of tools that you see, you know, the Reeves inventory into predicting the future, the Reeves questionnaire that does this, the Reeves thing, they don't exist, by the way. You know, they all look different and they smell different and they feel different, but they're all distilled from the same research, whether it be questionnaires, multiple choice inventories, schedules, and so on. Sometimes clients fill them in, sometimes we fill them in, we tap them into computers, they bring out scores, they show graphs. It's really pretty and very, very, very reassuring. And there is that comfort in the application of science to the human condition. And in fact, there is so much confidence in this that we can now develop policy and practice to have a zero target for suicide in mental health services. ain't gonna happen, but you know, it's nice. It's obviously what we aspire to. And institutions have the same level of relief too, because, you know, we all want genuinely to get it right. After Isabel's death, when I put in my PhD proposal to a very reputable university, my plan was to develop a risk assessment tool. Which was going to be used particularly for person-centered practitioners. And we all know that person-centered practitioners don't like risk assessment tools, but they like this one, the one that I was going to design. And it was only going to have about 4 or 5 questions. And I know person-centered counsellors don't like asking questions, but they wouldn't have minded asking these ones because they'd have been really nice questions. And they would have ticked these boxes with the clients, and it would have told them with absolute certainty whether this person was going to end their life through suicide or not. I genuinely believed it. I've still got that research proposal. And the university went, oh, that's marvellous. Come along and do that. And it actually took me about 2 years to for it to dawn on me, actually, of course it doesn't exist. What I was proposing doesn't exist. It sits at the end of the rainbow. And actually what I was trying to do was to ensure that I never, ever had to go to that awful place again. That I was still struggling to sit with the uncertainty of really not knowing whether Anne was going to end her life or not. Large et al. In 2016 did a meta-analysis of a whole range of risk assessment tools and concluded, unfortunately, that 95% of high-risk patients don't die through suicide. So, you know, we can follow the science in terms of risk factors, but actually 95% of the people we identify as falling in the risk factors don't die through suicide, which somewhat leaves us in a bit of a quandary. But we could just about reconcile that, but then Large delivered their next blow, which was we found no evidence that the statistical strength of risk assessment is improved over time. Basically what they were saying when you read the full article is that we know no more than we did 40 years ago. And for all this research, most of the risk assessment tools have no statistical validity in predicting individual outcome at all. They are not unhelpful across the board. But the message here is use them in the context and don't over expect of what they can deliver. So they can be useful, low-level indications of potential. They can help inform a dialogic approach. They can provide a structure through which we can talk with people and have dialogues. And they can help organisations feel a little bit better. But it leaves us with a bit of a tangle. So we have contracts, we have policies, procedures, we have personal anxieties, personal perspectives, we have the contract, which I think I've said it's like the generation game, remembering things that have come past on the conveyor belt. What the outcome is, of course, we have uncertain science, and working with risk can result in a bit of a therapeutic tangle with a counsellor trying to gather information and make the right decision, and the client left frightened, uncertain, and not understood because we're too hooked up on looking for the answer elsewhere, rather than sitting with Anne and say, Anne, tell me more about this, you know, tell me more about what you're thinking and what you're feeling. Schneidman said, I love this quote, I use it all the time, and if you sign on to these workshops, you'll hear it again, I can guarantee it. Schneidman said, our best route to understanding suicide is not through the study of the structure of the brain, nor the study of social statistics, nor the study of mental diseases, but directly through the study of human emotions described in the words of the suicidal person. The most important question to a potentially suicidal person is not an inquiry about family history or laboratory tests of blood or spinal fluid, but where do you hurt and how can I help you? And I like reading it out, and I know you can read it yourself, but this is a really important quote. This was back in the late 90s. Schneidman was a very, very important suicidologist. You know, he was a key writer in the States. He was powerful. He held power within the American Psychological Association. And what Schneidman is saying is he's throwing all our accepted wisdom of how we approach suicide, how we still approach suicide in 2010, 2020, and he's thrown it out the window. And he's saying, yeah, that's all partly interesting, but the most important question is, where do you hurt and how can I help you? Which is a really profound challenge to the status quo. I would argue instead that I would quite happily, and in my own practice, have abandoned all pretense of suicide risk assessment, because if I was that skilled in predicting the future, I would do the lottery probably. And I go back to my roots, which is as a therapist, and I articulate the need for myself to do suicide exploration, where we really hear relationally the pain or anguish of the client, that we open opportunities, that we be brave. We're helping the client to help themselves. We're not removing their autonomy. We're not doing to them, we're doing with them. The information is three-dimensional and not two-dimensional. Unless a client doesn't have capacity, it is a simple fact that it will not be me that keeps Anne alive. It will be Anne who finds a way of keeping herself alive. And that is not going to be achieved. That insight is not going to be achieved by ticking boxes. So let's just quickly revisit before we finish. What did we say that risk assessment told us about Anne? Female, chronic pain, so on and so forth. We've been through these. If we just change the lens slightly to a suicide exploration lens, it tells us that she's frightened. She doesn't know what to do. She's grieving. She longs for a time when she was happy and free from pain. She feels burdened, and she feels a burden. She can be helped to name what has kept her alive. You know, she can explore what are the things, Anne, that have helped you not end your life. She can reflect on different ideas about her future. I would argue this doesn't really open many therapeutic doors. It gives us factual information, but it doesn't actually give us an insight into Anne's intrapersonal process. That is a list of opening therapeutic doors, points at which we can make absolute meaningful contact with Anne in a way that best equips her to be able to support herself and meet her own needs. So meeting suicidality, I'm coming to the end of this talk, meeting suicidality, there are lots of things that sit around the work. They are of course important. We need to think about them. I'm not advocating that circular list I gave you before, we disregard that. It would be foolhardy, it would be unethical, it would be unprofessional. We need to be mindful of our contract, but we need to think about what that actually means and how we're going to do it. We need to be mindful that there's policies and procedures, but we need to know what they say and how do we do it. We need to be aware of our personal perspectives and our personal anxieties, and we need to know how we can support ourselves with that. But ultimately, we need to know that working with suicide risk is absolutely about sitting with uncertainty. It's about sitting with the not knowing. It's about working collaboratively. Risk assessment won't give us definitive answers. Ethics won't give us definitive answers. In a previous life, I held the role of chair of BACP. I'm old enough to remember when BACP had a code of ethics. And I remember the uproar from BACP members about how awful the code of ethics was, because they didn't need a professional association telling them what to do. And then, of course, we have the ethical framework, and members are in uproar because they need an ethical framework to tell them what to do. Because when I'm sat with Anne, I turn to the ethical framework, and what I want to do is find that page that says, when you're working with somebody called Anne, you should break confidentiality because she's going to do this, or you should hold confidentiality. And of course, I don't know. But it's a relational process. It's not a procedural process. And ultimately, we need to be absolutely brave in being able to go there. And what I want to explore, if we had more time, which hopefully I'm going to pick up in January, is Schneidman's question about the most important question is, where do you hurt and how can I help you, is of course profoundly important. I think I made that point. What Schneidman didn't talk about, of course, was just how challenging it was to do that. And there's a whole stack of reasons why even the most experienced practitioner, this is not a trainee crisis, this is a practice crisis, that even the most experienced practitioner can be so frightened, can be so immobilized that the question just doesn't come out. I hope that's been helpful to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. I must say that this has been one of the most generous presentations we've ever experienced at these Thursdays, and I know that people are joining me in thanking you, because I asked Andrew to do a short presentation, and I've never experienced anybody speaking so fast, because he really wanted to share as much as possible with you. I think you will all join me in thanking Andrew, and I will let him just to catch his breath, because I don't think he took a single breath in during this presentation, and just tell you about his course in January, because I'm sure we will want to hear more and to discuss it, because there was a very interesting discussion also going on in the chat box, if you've noticed. And I just want to share my screen very briefly with you to show you how to find the course. So you all know, can you see it? Yeah, can you see my shared screen? Anybody show me the thumbs up? Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yes, so you all signed up for this event on SDS page, and if you just scroll down a little bit, let me just move this away, scroll down a little bit, I put Andrew's course, which starts on 12th of January, in our featured course. So you go on the front page and it will be featured course. And why I also wanted to emphasize it, at the moment, it is with super early bird discount. So it's a lowest price you can get for that course at the moment, and it will last until the end of this month. So if you want to book it, I think it's about £60 discount. So the course is running over 3 weeks, 1 day a week. And I think it's quite a convenient time. Yes, between 10 and 12. So from 12 to 26th of January, but it will be between 10 and 12. And these are Tuesdays. On Tuesdays, between 10 and 12, from 12 to 26th of January, 1 Tuesday a week. So, because we usually only stay here for 45 minutes, but I'm more than happy to ask at least one question. And I think lots of people were discussing in the chat box, Andrew, about disclosure, non-disclosure, asking a question, not asking a question, and where the ultimate responsibility lies. Is it with us? Is it with the GP? Is it with the client? What is your view on this?
Well, in terms of asking a question, first of all, I did talk a lot and I did talk quickly. And what you didn't realise, Julia, that it normally takes me at least 20 minutes to say my own name. So I did get through really quickly. That was a reduced Shakespeare Company version of working with suicidal clients. To answer your question specifically, when I was 18, I trained as a Samaritan's volunteer, and for all the training I've had over the years, I would like to say that the training I had as a Samaritan's volunteer, particularly around working with suicide, was by far and away the best training I've ever had. I mean, Premier League, really. My counselling training was dire in relation to working with suicide. It was kind of like, if you suspect something, pass it on, which doesn't bear any resemblance to the realities of practice at all. Whereas the Samaritan's training was superb, because it was, you ask the question, you don't make a big deal of this, you just talk honestly and respectfully and openly, and you ask the question. I ask all my clients about suicide. And I ask it early on, and we'll revisit it. And I'll say things like, when clients have told their story, I say, that sounds really hard. And are there times when you feel that this is too much? Because when we get to that place, any one of us can think of ending our lives or hurting ourselves to cope with this. I always use first person. I absolutely reject the feeling suicidal, or indeed issues around self-harm, is a them and us thing, This is all of us, we all have our mental health and our vulnerabilities, and any one of us can go to a place of crisis. I always use first person language. I always work to try and destigmatize, and I always ask the question. And I've never ever in 30 odd years of working as a therapist had a client who has taken exception to being asked the question if it's asked in a relational way. They have taken exception if it's part of a tick box process. In terms of responsibility, you know, the GP is ultimately the responsible medical officer and holds a responsibility. However, for me, if I'm working with adult clients, I supervise schools counselling. But if I'm working with adult clients, if a client has capacity, if my sense is, like Anne has capacity as a therapist, I have a responsibility to her, but not a responsibility for her. My responsibility to her is to ensure that I do everything that I said I'm going to do, that I stick to the agreements that we've made, that I'm transparent and honest, that I don't change my mind halfway through, and I explain everything and work tirelessly to work in collaboration with her consent. What I can't do is stop Anne from ending her own life. Whether I wanted to or not, I don't have the capacity to do that, but I would act professionally. If Anne didn't have capacity, and one of the suicides I experienced was a young man who didn't have capacity. He was hearing voices that were telling him to walk on the motorway and end his life. Then I think I have a different level of responsibility, and I think in those moments I have a responsibility for, because that person isn't at that place able to make a decision for themselves, but it's not something that we would do lightly. So I think clients have responsibility. I think when you're working with younger people, I know there's the issues around Gaelic competence, but more often counselling in schools is kind of embedded in safeguarding processes. My experience is that it's better, again, in being very transparent with the young person, to share that with the system. If I was going to make one criticism of counselling training in the UK before I head off and people start shouting at me, is that I think too much training in the UK continues to be focused on therapy purely as an individual process, what happens between me and my client. And of course, that's hugely important, but our clients don't exist in vacuums. And I think we need to think more systemically. Who else is in this client's life? Who else is part of this client's world? With my client's cooperation, I can kind of help them engage with, only with my client's cooperation. So I'll shut up. You see, I can talk a lot, Julia. There you go. I'll be quiet. You're on mute, Julia.
Thank you. Thank you. You see, even I forget to unmute myself. It's everybody's problem. I want to quote one of the feedbacks, just one, from Marianne. She says, I love Andrew's talk, so real, so honest, so informed, so balanced. Thank you, refreshing. And I think we can all join in that. Thank you very much, Andrew. It was lovely. And before we finish, I just want to say we are meeting again on the 3rd of December, and it will be with Professor Wendy Dryden, but this time we persuaded Wendy to do a live demonstration during SDS Thursday, but one of you will have to volunteer to be a client. So that will be fascinating, and I hope you will all join us on the 3rd of December. Am I right? 3rd of December? Yes, it's Thursday, and it's 7 o'clock. And for now, I will say thank you again to Andrew. Thank you to all of you. And I will unmute you for a few seconds just to say goodbye, so we don't all leave in silence. Let me just ask all to unmute, or I can ask you and you'll unmute yourself. So thank you very much and goodbye. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Really?
Bye. Thank you.
Good to see you all. So many familiar faces now. We have quite a lot of events carrying on Zoom right now. So I see from the Dana course.
Oh, fantastic.
That's
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you.
On psychology.
Bye-bye.
I've got Steve Langstaff. Oh, there's one black guy was there. Good.
Okay. See you. Thank you, Andrew. Bye.
Thank you, Andrew.
I'm ending the event now. Bye, guys.
Thank
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Marilyn.
Bye.
Misschien dat je er maar
Okay, comments. I
comment.
like to keep the comments.
Comment.
Oh gosh, a lot of comments today. A lot and lot of chat. That's lovely. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Wonderful, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.